Greetings, folks, and welcome to the Electromaker podcast. This is your audio midweek roundup of all things Maker and embedded and lovely. This is a YouTube show primarily, which is why if you're hearing this podcast for the first time, there may be times where I refer to things that are on a screen, and that's because at the Electromaker YouTube channel, this show is it's there every week with screen grabs and me talking to the camera and all of the stuff you would expect from a weekly video show. However, there are occasionally podcast-only specialities. There are actually some bigger plans for the podcast coming up in a short time. As you can probably hear from my voice, I'm still ever so slightly gravelly. That's why there hasn't been a podcast for the past 2 weeks. Nothing particularly terrible. I've just been ill. And when you have a cold and you are a freelance video and podcasty creator person, for want of a better title, unfortunately, you just have to stop working when that happens. And so I did. Anyway, this is quite a fun show. There's a lot of interesting stuff. If you are one of the people who are, like me, a crossover music and microcontrollers person, there's going to be a lot of stuff in the show that you will like the sound of. But there's also some celebrations of Raspberry Pi's birthday and a retro computer and some wonderful stuff on funding websites. It's a great balanced show. So with that in mind, let's get right on with it. We're going to begin this week's show by looking at the winners of the Electromaker of the Month in February. Now, in case you aren't familiar with the idea behind it, or you just need a reminder, Electromaker of the Month is something that we started this year and we'll be doing every month. Month is sort of in the title, isn't it? But essentially, this is celebrating ingenuity, innovation, and people actually doing stuff, building stuff, or having great ideas. Because as you're probably familiar with, there is a project section on the Electromaker website. In fact, we spend quite a lot of time talking about those projects on this show. I write about them every day. I'm looking at these projects every day. I get to be blown away by them. The Electromaker of the Month essentially is an idea that takes that and celebrates it and allows people to win prizes based purely on their projects. Entry isn't anything special. You don't have to fill out a special form. You just have to upload your project to the Electromaker website. You make a free account, you upload the documentation of your project along with any pictures or videos that you have, and at the end of each month, a panel of independent judges, which is great news for me, it means I don't have to make any decisions, decide on the top 3 prizes. So those prizes are actually pretty good as well. So runners-up get a whole bunch of swag from Nordic. This is whoever comes second and third, including an NRF 52840 USB dongle, which is a really cool little BLE development kit that you can just plug into any USB port and use, along with some nice Nordic swag here. You get a whole bunch of Electromaker branded stuff as well. And the winner, the one winning project, gets a whole load of Nordic prototyping gear. Now, I've talked about the Thingy 91 quite a few times on the show. It's something that has, for various reasons, crossed my hands a few times now, and every time I've loved it. It's just such a lovely kit. It's got such a lot in it. And the same can be said of the NRF 5340 kit. If you're wanting to get into Bluetooth Low Energy, it's a pretty fully featured board, and there's also a tile and a Nordic mug. The winner gets all of those things, including a $50 Amazon gift voucher and the same pile of Electromaker swag as well. So that's what the contest itself is. Let's meet the winners of the February edition. Now, there is a blog post that ties all of this together, and I'll be linking that blog post in the description because it links out to all of the winning projects. But I'm going to talk about them individually on the project pages very briefly. So Loopy came third, and I actually talked about Loopy already on the show because I thought it was just a very ingenious idea that used some nice parts. I seem to remember saying something along the lines of, I like the aesthetics of it in that it looks quite refined, but you can still see here things like, there's a few little errors there which make it show that it is handmade. Personally, I really like that aesthetic, and the judges must have liked that as well because this is the one that won third place. So just very briefly, all of these project pages are linked in the blog post, which is in the description of this video. But the things that grabbed me in this project is the use of the ATtiny85 board. It was actually a what do they even call it? Not a Digi keyboard. Digispark board, yeah. Digispark ATtiny85 board was used to run it, and also I really like the diffusion on them. On this, like sometimes it can be quite difficult to make addressable LEDs or LED strips of any kind not look like LED strips, and this really does look quite nice. In second place was the Band, and this is a really interesting prototype for monitoring vitality on the go using a Bluetooth-enabled microcontroller and some sensors. Now, the write-up goes into a lot of detail about what it can do now and the plans for the future. A lot of the ideas for the data that's being collected with these sensors is that it could be fed into some kind of algorithm, some kind of neural network to create a model that helps it improve based on the user. I think that's a future plan at this stage. But as you can see, we have the Arduino Nano BLE Sense here, which has a bunch of sensor stuff built in. It can also communicate via Bluetooth 5, and a couple of extra sensors here for heartbeat. And further down here, you can see there's various ways that it can be integrated with technology. So we have I think this is the Nordic app for talking with Bluetooth for Bluetooth development. And there's a few other things as well, like, for example, this is going to be something that happens in the future. This is taking a sample of snoring and using that data to train the model. Again, this is a bit of a future plan. But as I mentioned before, not everything that has to go up on this website has to be a finished idea. This can be something that you are working on with documentation, with plans for the future, how you're trying to make something work, even how you try to make something work and maybe if it didn't work the way you wanted it to. This is all completely fair game. We really want to see as many ideas as possible. And this is one of the reasons, I think, probably why this ended up in second place. Again, it's not something that I get to decide, which for me suits me perfectly well because it means I get to enthusiastically talk about things on the show however I like without there being any worry that means that it has a greater chance or a lesser chance of winning each month. And the winner of Electromaker of the Month in February, the first place project, was this Iron Man walkie-talkie from Kutluhan Akhtar. Now, this is a wonderful project, not only because it has a very cool looking Iron Man PCB, of course, but because it takes something which I think is quite complicated to a lot of people. LoRa and long-range Wi-Fi is still a new enough technology that not everyone's had their hands on it in maybe the same way that they have with Bluetooth or with Wi-Fi. Little ESP32 boards have been around for a very long time, whereas LoRa isn't exactly new, but the prevalence of it is. That's my take on it, at least. And this takes very simple, very cheap parts and makes an implementation of it, which is a bit of a discovery, a bit of a look into LoRa from first principles. But yes, in short, as you can see here, this uses normal buttons to make a keypad. It uses a couple of Arduino Nanos. It uses a couple of LoRa transceivers, the name of which I have forgotten briefly. I did have this before. RYLR998 modules. And also using the ubiquitous Nokia screens, which used to be ubiquitous because they were in everyone's phones, but now are pretty much only used by DIY maker types, which is a sort of interesting thing in and of itself. But as I said, one of the things that makes, from my perspective at least, makes this such a great project is that it does take something that is quite complicated and brings it down to first principles, and there is a lot of explanation and working in this particular project. As I've mentioned, you don't have to have a finished and working project in order to necessarily be considered a good project on the site, but this is sort of the best of all worlds because it has a fantastic finished product. It has a huge write-up with different ways that it was all achieved, and it's definitely worth having a read through because watching someone work their way through a problem and how that they solve it is a great way to sort of prime yourself to do it as well. Of course, there's absolutely no substitute for doing things yourself, but this level of write-up is something that is always very useful. Anyway, congratulations, Kudlahan. This is a well-deserved win. We've probably already been in touch with you to ask about all of the about where we can send all of the Nordic swag out to. And I just wanted to say thank you in general to everyone who's been submitting projects to the Electromaker website recently and for a long time. There are people who have been repeatedly coming back and showing us what they're working on, what's new, and it's incredible to see the wide breadth of projects and the different things that people are doing. Some of these people are working professionally in the industry and they're using their stuff to make interesting stuff. Some of them are just like me, just enthusiasts who maybe haven't got any training, they're just learning as they go. Some of them are maybe computer scientists who are doing this in their spare time. It really doesn't matter. The huge variation of projects and seeing people's ideas is one of the main things I love about doing this. And now that we're able to actually celebrate it, it's great. It's the one kind of project / contest I've been so excited to finally announce. And yeah, now we are doing it. So this contest is ongoing. We've just said congratulations to our February winners, but it won't be long until I'm back doing the same for our winners for March, for April, for May. So if you have an idea in your head, if you have something that you really want to try and make, then there's never been a better time to do it than now. Because if you put it on the Electromaker website by either making a free account and logging in here, if you already have an account, you can just head to the upload project page and yeah, that's it. You upload your project. You write it up. If you have photos and videos, all the better. And every month from now, there will be the independent panel of judges who I still haven't even met or spoke to, which I quite like. I quite like the fact that I'm separate to this. I just get to talk about it with enthusiasm. Yeah, every month from here on, we will be giving away prizes for ingenuity, which is fantastic. Now we're going to move on to a Raspberry Pi project, which is a retro computer Raspberry Pi project, something that we always love to see. But before we do, I wanted to quickly acknowledge the fact that the Raspberry Pi has turned 10 years old. That's right, on the 29th of February 2011 is when the Pi came out. 2011? Wait, no, 2012, because then it would be 11 years old. The Raspberry Pi is 10. The 29th of February 2012 is when the first board came out. So whether you want to say the 28th of February this year or the 1st of March this year, it doesn't particularly matter. The Raspberry Pi is now 10. And in fact, it's kind of a crazy thing for me to think about because, again, as I've said many times, the Raspberry Pi is one of the main reasons why I do this. This is the first Raspberry Pi I owned. And this is one of the first. I believe this is the second revision of, this is the Model B revision 2. All I do remember is that it had a full 512 megabytes of RAM on it. Yeah, let me just get a little bit closer so you can see that. So yes, this is the Raspberry Pi that started it off for me. This is the Model B. And most of the early days stuff I learned about Raspberry Pi, and indeed Linux I learned on this board really. There was this and an old laptop I had, and that was the extent of my hacker kit. That, of course, along with an old Arduino, along with an original Arduino as well. But yeah, I kind of credit this board with starting this. I wouldn't be standing here talking to you, well, in the background all blurry, if it wasn't for this little board right here. And I'm sure a lot of you watching feel the same. We have a lot to thank the Raspberry Pi Foundation for, but at the end of the day, it was a fantastic product, and that's one of the reasons why it was such a massive smash hit straight off the bat. So yes, the Pi is now a decade old, and this is something that I wrote about on the Electrowire, by the way. We do have a sort of semi-regular news service now from Electromaker, which is a nice thing. It's basically just me reporting on news stories that come through that are either far too exciting to not share immediately, or stuff that might not have time to fit into a regular weekly Electromaker show. So if you like the Electromaker show and want more, then yeah, the Electrowire is something that you might want to keep an eye on. All of those stories go up on Twitter, and under the blog, we have a specific tag for Electrowire news. Some of it isn't news, some of it's just things that are far too cool not to talk about. So I'm pretending they're news, and that's how we're going to do the news. But yes, happy birthday Pi. It's been a fantastic decade. Now let's look at a retro computer which uses a Pi as its brain. Now, we do love a good retro computer build here, and the Sol 20 is a pretty special retro computer. As it says here, it's laying claim to be the first fully assembled microcomputer with a built-in keyboard and television output. The Sol 20 was launched back in 1976, a very early iteration on the personal computer. Now, there's a lot more to this article than I really have time to go into. But needless to say, this is a faithful recreation of the Sol 20, and it is using a Raspberry Pi. And this isn't so much a kind of writing of the Raspberry Pi. This isn't taking Raspberry Pi OS and making it look like the Sol terminal computer. This is someone who has taken an emulation of that computer and built upon it to turn it into a usable and actual real feeling, for want of a better word, Sol terminal computer. So a key sentence here is from Michael Gardy, who is the maker of this beautiful retro reimagining of the Sol 20. On top of this, it emulates the original hardware, providing a display via the HDMI port and a virtual cassette interface for loading and saving programs. And I think one of the things that we really should appreciate here is just how good this looks. I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing because it's such a massive amount of effort to put the software and hardware together in order to make this work in the first place, but this really does look like the original Sol 20. It's quite a wonderful build. Everything down to the keycaps. It's just wonderful. Now, if you're just interested in the operating system behind the Sol 20, the version of the emulation that Michael used, this is his GitHub page, Kid Mirage, is available on his GitHub. This is the Sol 20 reproduction, as it says here, a Sol emulator that was used with his Sol 20 reproduction, but this will work with a Raspberry Pi, well, it says Raspberry Pi 4 here, just Raspberry Pi 4. I don't know if that's specifically that hardware or not, but yes, known to work on Raspberry Pi 4. But there's links from this out to the original project and all that kind of stuff. I don't really have time to go through all of that right now. Just what a wonderful recreation, a faithful recreation of another retro computer. It's one of my favorite things that people do with modern hardware is emulate old hardware. I've said this in various iterations on this show various times. Take something old and put something new in it, wonderful. Take something new and make it look and work like something old, also wonderful. It's kind of a dual retro technology changeover. This sentence is going nowhere. I will leave a link to this in the description of the video. And if you are someone who ever had their hands on an original Sol 20, do let me know. I'd be very interested to hear your experiences. It's one of the retro computers that I had heard of, but it really is just heard of, never seen, wasn't familiar with until recently. So yeah, what a wonderful project. The Electromaker podcast is entirely funded by the Electromaker Shop. At electromaker.io we have a shop tab, and you can buy everything from your first Arduino hobby maker kit to some quite serious industrial gear there. Anything you need pretty much for any scale of project you'll probably be able to find in our shop. And as I said, that's the primary way that we make this show happen. We don't run adverts on YouTube, we don't have a Patreon, we don't do any of that kind of stuff, and if possible we'd like to avoid doing so. Selling stuff from the shop seems to be the best way to go. So it would mean a lot to me if you could consider checking out electromaker.io and the shop for anything you might need for your next project. Also, if you have a YouTube account, heading to the Electromaker YouTube channel and dropping a subscription, maybe commenting on one of the videos and liking it, all of that YouTube nonsense would be a great help as well, as that's how you get YouTube to notice you, as it happens. But anyway, yes, thank you for your time, and let's get on with the rest of the show. We're now heading into the part of the show called Funding Website Things, where we look at things on funding websites, and we are returning to crowd supply to a very familiar name. Yes, Lime Micro are back. Now, the Lime STR Mini is something that some of you may well be familiar with. It was fantastically popular, and as was the original Lime SDR board. These are software-defined radios. And the Lime SDR Mini was the original version in the same form factor as you're seeing on the screen, which was basically a little USB key with an FPGA and a front-end wideband receiving, transceiver for working with software-defined radios. Of course, it's in the name. And this is the new version of that. Now, if I seem slightly out my depth talking about this, it's because I am. I've spoken on the show many times in the past that things like FPGAs are just so far out of my realm of understanding that I find it very difficult to even talk about them without sounding like I'm potentially saying something very stupid indeed. And I feel very similarly about software-defined radios. It's something that is on the list for what I would really love to spend some time learning about. And if I do ever end up having a retirement, I'll probably spend a fair amount of it messing around with software-defined radios. But for now, all I can tell you is that if you liked the original idea of the Lime SDR Mini, you're going to love this, because it's basically more of the same, but in a slightly more open package. Because the key sentence here is the Lime SDR Mini software-defined radio with a new FPGA, the Lattice ECP5. Not only is the ECP5 more readily available during the chip shortage than the Intel Max 10 FPGA used in the previous design, but it has an extensive set of open source tools and a great community of developers. Moving over to Loco, a tiny two-piece LoRa battery-powered tracker. This works using GPS, and as you can see here, it is two small units that work in tandem to send GPS data to a phone via Bluetooth. So there's the two units here, and then one of the things about this that sets it aside slightly is that it is peer-to-peer. So that means that this is getting GPS data from GPS satellites, but it's sending that data directly via a peer-to-peer connection, a long-range peer-to-peer connection from the Air unit, which is being held and turned on right now. That's the bigger unit because it has a big 18650 battery in it. And the ground unit here, which sits in the house, it picks up signals from that, and it will send those signals to your phone via Bluetooth. And it's tiny. I mean, look at the size of this thing. It's diminutive. I love that word, diminutive. The app will take that GPS data and it will send it to your phone, which at the time of making this, I think it's just iPhone. Data to a smartphone app via Bluetooth iPhone only with this version. However, this is an open source project, as most things are on Crowd Supply. So I imagine it wouldn't be massively difficult to port that over to Android as long as you are comfortable with the idea of piping GPS data into an Android app. Don't speak to me about Java, I have no idea. But yes, that's the idea. But the thing about this, again, that I say, I think the key thing here is that it is peer-to-peer. It's kind of amazing. Most cellular IoT things, you're putting a SIM card into something so that it can use the same cellular network as anything else. This is GPS, but that doesn't rely on anything cellular. It is purely peer-to-peer. Which is a blessing and a curse, I suppose, depending on your use case. But if you are interested in this, it seems like something that might be very interesting to work with. No idea how hackable it's going to be, but this is, exciting enough to really grab my attention. I'll be interested to see how much it costs. This is the kind of thing that could actually be quite cheap and definitely worth getting just to play with. But even if it isn't, even if it's something that costs quite a bit, if you have a specific use case that you need your own GPS tracking that doesn't rely on networks, that maybe is in a place where you don't get particularly good signal, for example, this is definitely worth a look. Now, let's talk about BluesWireless, and specifically the BluesWireless GPS and LTE-M note card. Now, this is something that I was not familiar with until relatively recently, but I did talk about this project a little while ago on the show. This is sending a cellular GPS tracker around the world. Literally, this was in a bag. In fact, if I scroll down here, you can see, yes, big chunky battery, and this base board here, and this thing you can see here is the note card. And if I zoom up to here, you can see it in slightly more detail. Now, since this was published, BluesWireless have actually been in touch with the other people at Electromaker and sent one out for review. And Robin has done a fantastic review on the Electromaker website of the BluesWireless Notecard, which I suggest you go and give a read to, because Robin is a engineer through and through. He knows his stuff. So when he says he found very difficult to dislike anything about this board, it means a lot. It's very easy to get up and running with. The thing itself is here. And by the way, it's tiny. Can I just quickly point this out? This is the very same card. And yeah, you know, my fingers for scale, this thing is diminutive. I've been using that word far too often recently, and I am aware of that. But this thing is super, super small. And that little note card fits into the M2 slot that you are seeing just here. This is the part of the development kit, the same development kit that was sent out to Robin. He wrote the review on it, and they sent one out to me because, yes, we're going to be giving this away. So just before we get to the giveaway, I wanted to spend a moment more on this review because it really is fantastic. Now, as I've mentioned, Robin is an engineer. He's a lot more experienced than I am, and he was able to give this a much more thorough review than I would have been able to. However, as I had my hands on one, I have actually had this out and had a little play with it, and I found it insanely easy to get up and running with. The documentation is fantastic. This MCU, this Swan MCU, works with the Arduino IDE, so you can just plug it in. But the board itself doesn't even need a microcontroller to work with. You can just use the API. It runs on JSON commands, and that's all fantastically documented as well. If you'd like to know a little bit more, head to the link in the description. I'll leave a link to this article in the description, which goes through everything. But yeah, as I mentioned, he said it is important in journalism that bias is avoided at all costs and that all products should be approached from a neutral point of view. However, no matter how hard I try to find negatives with the board or how hard I try to fault the note card, I couldn't help but fall in love with the device, which I think is just such a fantastic and lovely thing to put in a review. But anyway, as I mentioned, we are going to give these away, and this is going to be a special Electromaker competition beginning now. So, as always, when we do special competitions on Electromaker, they're usually for special reasons. And yes, this BluesWireless development kit is a special reason indeed. The baseboard itself comes with the Swan MCU already on it, so this is everything you need to get going. And of course, you get the beautiful little cellular GPS edge connector that can fit into the board here. But look, as I have previously mentioned, you don't even need a microcontroller to work with it. It is insanely easy to get up and running with. Anyway, that's enough waxing lyrical about how much I find this thing awesome. I need to give it to one of you, and the way that you enter this competition is the way that you enter all special Electromaker competitions. You need to be a subscriber to the Electromaker YouTube channel, and you need to head to the comment section of this video, and you need to say exactly why you would like to have one of these, what kind of project you would come up with, and you need to leave the hashtag BLUES, BLUES, Blues. And we will be going through all of those entries in next week's show and choosing someone to win this fantastic little bit of cellular IoT development kit. You know, it's one of the weird blessings and curses of doing a show like this is that I am so lucky to be able to get my hands on all of these things for free to play with. But by the same token, no matter how much I like it, I know that very, very soon it will be out of the door and on its way to someone else, which is, of course, one of the things I love about the show. I love that we get to give stuff away, and I am very privileged that I get to play with stuff for free. But by the same token, there's part of me that's kind of like, but this is mine now? We're closing out the show with just a few interesting things that have either been sent to me or I saw on the internet since we've been off the air. And we're beginning with a really unique idea when it comes to recognizing speech. Now, this is a project from students at Cornell. As you can see, this is the Cornell Chronicle. And there is a YouTube video going through it on the page, which is a minute long, definitely worth watching. The whole article itself is definitely worth a read. It's a little too long for me to go through piece by piece now. But in short, the idea behind this is that this is a edge AI camera that is attached to a necklace pointing straight upwards that is looking at your lips and learning the way that you speak. The idea being that you will then be able to give vocal commands without actually speaking, which sounds odd, but when you think about the amount of times that you might want to, for example, use the Google Assistant because you don't want to use your hands, but you also don't want to actually say, "Okay, Google," or whatever. My phone just... But yes, my phone interrupting aside, the idea behind this is lip reading, essentially. It's a camera that's always pointing up and it's always reading your lips and it's looking for the same kind of pickup phrases that my phone just picked up on right now, but without having to actually speak, which has a number of advantages. It means that if you are in a situation where you do want to use some kind of hands-free phone thing, you don't have to actually say something out loud. And as it points out in the article, Ruidong Zhang, whose name I'm probably horrifically mispronouncing, I'm sorry, who is the creator of this, says, people may think I already have a speech recognition device on my phone, but you need to vocalize sound for those, and that might not always be socially appropriate, or the person might not be able to vocalize speech. This is just essentially saying that anyone who can move their mouth in a way that emulates speech will be able to use this thing. Now, of course, it's in a very early development right now, and you might want to read the article yourself to learn a bit more about it, but I certainly thought it was interesting enough to talk about. So, the M8 tracker. This is something I'm going to touch on very briefly. It is appropriate for the Electromaker Show because this uses a Teensy at its heart to run everything. And it is essentially like an old school music tracker. Very quickly, old school music trackers, things run downwards rather than side to side. And each step downwards has a different note values and different automation values. It's a different way of thinking about digital audio or digital audio workstation. But this is a handheld version that uses a Teensy at its core and is just incredible sounding. I heard about the project from a few different friends who were very enthusiastic and said this is something that you should be interested in, and honestly didn't really look into it much at the time. Since then, I have been to this website, I've been all over YouTube, I've watched almost every single video I can find of someone actually having hands-on action of it, and it's stunning, it's beautiful. And yeah, it has a Teensy at its core. I'm not going to give any more showtime to it this week because A, I'll talk about it way too much, and B, it would probably get away from the more DIY and maker aspect of things. This is a product that you can pre-order. If you are interested in it, however, I suggest heading to dirtywave.com, reading about it, and then, as I said, you can look at the videos on their YouTube channel or just search for it on YouTube. There's a few of the larger named gear review and synthesis channels that have done videos on it already, and it's stunning. It's just stunning. Moving over to the Maker Music Festival 2022. Now, if you are only hearing about this for the first time, it is as exciting as it sounds from the title, if you are someone who loves music and maker culture. For me, it is especially exciting because, not only do I do this show where I frequently talk about how much I love microcontrollers and music and maker culture and where those things all mix, the very first page you are entered to when you come into this is the online campus of the Maker Music Festival, and you can jump through all the different sections of it. But I love the fact that the very first section you land on is Parch. I studied Harry Parch in university. He was a very large inspiration to me, someone who built his own instruments. I could talk about microtonality here, and I'm not going to. It's not the right show for it. But yeah, the Maker Music Festival 2022 is coming. You can head to the site and go through various different projects. This is the virtual campus. And I will leave a link to this website in the description. But right now, the festival itself is in May. It's not coming up for a while yet. The festival goes live on the 14th and 15th with new exhibits, which will be on the website here. However, if you would like to get involved, you can. I'll also leave a link to this Adafruit page here because it has the release just here. This is the announcement. But if you want to get involved, you can also head to the Maker Music Festival website. There is a menu up at the top, I believe. Oh, no, it isn't in this part of the site. I will leave a link to the relevant part of the site as well if you do want to register and get involved. Because essentially, if you are a musician who does work with things that could be considered maker culture. I'm saying that carefully because it doesn't have to be microcontrollers. You don't have to be making music with Arduinos or something to do this, but I do know that people who watch this show have that same intersection that I do between music and maker culture. You can apply to be a part of this festival. I am not sure if I'm going to have the time, but I have got an idea that I'm trying to get a pitch together to be a part of this, because I've really wanted to be a part of this festival since I first heard it. But yes, newborn baby and freelance lifestyle means that I am so short of time. But also, there's also a music makers marketplace. So there'll be a showcase of different products that intersect, again, makers and music. Things like Baylor I've talked about in the past. There are some fantastic projects out there that work like that. So that call to action is open until March 27th, so there's still a good 17 days to get something together and to get it in there. And you can head to makermusicfestival.com or just head to the links in the description of this video. And even if you don't want to be involved in it, we're going to come back to this when the festival itself happens, because it's just wonderful. And even if you're not as interested in the music side of it, some of the inventiveness that goes into these projects is well worth seeing. And yes, don't worry, I'll definitely be coming back to this one. We're going to end this week's show with an announcement from the Raspberry Pi blog. And this is an exciting one for me, because this is another kind of worlds collide moment for me. Much like there's been music and maker culture in the last section, this is game development and Raspberry Pi. As I mentioned earlier in the show, the Raspberry Pi was something that really started a lot for me, but equally in tandem was Unity 3D, a free game-making engine. And when I say game-making engine, I'm choosing those words relatively carefully, because it's not necessarily a programmer's tool, and it's not necessarily an artist's tool, and it's not necessarily someone who has ideas for a game structures tool. It can be all of those things. Multiple people in a game development studio will all work using Unity, all know how to use it, but have specialities in different parts of it. But from my perspective, my first real idea of how you can work with object-oriented programming came from C# and Unity, and the idea of taking abstract concepts and visualizing them using a 3D engine in order to actually learn how to code. That was something that Unity 3D taught me, and now Raspberry Pi is reaching out to young folks and young minds to teach them how to use Unity 3D. Anyway, my long introduction aside, this is a live stream that will be happening on YouTube. Raspberry Pi will be giving an introduction to Unity 3D at 18:30 GMT on Thursday the 24th of March 2022. I'll leave a link to this blog post in the description of the video so you can head back here to find it. Of course, you can also just go to the Raspberry Pi YouTube page at the time of the stream. But this blog post is certainly worth reading, especially if you are familiar with Raspberry Pi but not familiar with Unity 3D. Unity is a weird one in that there is a certain portion of the internet, and certainly the gaming internet, for want of a better term, that has a bit of a bad kind of vibe when it comes to Unity, thinking that a lot of broken and janky games come out that are made with the Unity engine. And the reason behind that is because Unity is incredibly easy to get started with and has a massive array of free assets. You can get so many free assets that you could build a game using only free assets and put together using tools that you don't necessarily understand. And yes, the game that will come out will be very janky indeed. But as with all things, it doesn't have to be like that. And if you'd like to get a good little start with Unity, this seems like a very good place to start. So that has been the podcast for this week. Thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for all of the support that you are showing this show. While this is primarily a YouTube show, I keep a quite close eye on the podcast stats, and I do know there's a large number of people that are downloading and listening to this show in audio format, and it really does mean a lot to me. I know I am a broken record of massive proportions by this point, but for those of you that are using this primarily as a listening platform, I'm going to kind of switch back and forth between doing some shows which are just purely the YouTube show, and some shows where, like I did in the last show, I'm going to give an actual brief description of a section before it actually comes on, to really make sure that there's nothing that is misunderstood in the podcast format. If you have heard that last show and you've heard this one and you have an opinion as to which is better, please do let me know, because tightening up the podcast is sort of my highest priority for what to do next with this show. And I would also like to maybe start doing a few interviews. If there's anyone specifically in the Maker and embedded universe that you would like to hear from, let me know and I'll reach out to them and see if they're up for getting onto the Electromaker Show for a little chat. But anyway, that is it for this week. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will speak to you next time.